Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So today we'll be talking about B2B digital communications in 2024, how to begin and where to thrive. So I'm delighted to be joined by James McCobb today. We'll say a bit more about each of us in a second. But first, just to say the recording is started. So we will answer any questions. So please do let us know if you have any through the chat function. And yeah, in terms of why we are here. So we'll be exploring the digital B2B frontier, and today's aims include exploring the evolution and significance of digital communications in the B2B sector, setting out why the use of digital channels is crucial for your organization in 2024. And hopefully this should help put the wheels in motion for your own journey, wherever that may be and whatever stage it's at, from the fundamentals of digital communications and allowing you to put in place more advanced strategies. In terms of the webinar itself, we'd love to know what else you'd like to get out of it. So please do use the chat function if there's anything along the way that you'd like to ask or like to have clarified. So it's definitely going to be a packed agenda. And in terms of that, then we're about to say a wee bit about us. Then I'll set the scene, go through the fundamentals for digital B2B comms, and then we'll summarize with the 10 things to get started with before opening the floor to any questions that you may have. And yes, in terms of us, then I am Michael McLennan. I recently founded a new strategic communications consultancy called Faur. I've previously worked in a variety of roles in digital and communications, including at Red Bull, BBC, Barclaycard, ITN, and Brunswick, which is where I was lucky enough to work under James McCobb, who is the CEO of the new digital agency Radstone Group. And he has over 25 years global communications experience leading international design and communications firms. So yeah, James, it'd be great to hear a bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Mickey. I'm James McCobb, CEO of the Radstone Group. Radstone Group is a global digital design, build, and strategy agency, particularly experienced in the B2B world. We have, as an agency, a deep depth of experience, particularly around financial stakeholder comms, talent communications, and communications to those groups that essentially affect a firm's license to operate. We have a number of private equity and investment firms as clients, so we also understand what that audience is looking to get out of a corporate website. Back to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we'll be talking a lot more about websites shortly. And then in terms of setting the scene, so I think it's important to take a whistle-stop tour through the evolution of B2B communications. Depending on your age, you'll remember some of these eras more vividly than others. Really, we had pre-2000s, then was when things had started evolving in the 90s, email becoming a very central means of communication. But it's really been in the past 20 years that things have accelerated markedly. As email became essential, so then did websites, search engine visibility, when you wanted to try and reach prospective clients. And then before you knew it, then we had platforms such as LinkedIn, social media, which helped hugely in terms of direct interactions and community engagement. It allowed targeted advertising in addition to the likes of Google. And these platforms and channels have only become more refined and more powerful over the years. And you've seen advancements in terms of the analytics and marketing automation, which has allowed people to refine their strategies even more in terms of precise targeting, which is something that can be really important in terms of the B2B sector when you're often looking to reach very niche groups. And speaking today, then digital communications are vital for nurturing leads, building relationships, and maintaining a competitive edge, because if you're not doing it, then somebody else undoubtedly will. But in terms of trends, then it can be quite tricky to figure out how to make the best use of digital when we're speaking about 2024, because there's a number of factors that have made things a bit more uncertain. On one hand, we have social platforms fragmenting. So we have some of the most popular platforms such as X and Facebook declining. Arguably, Facebook still goes up technically in number, but then I think its influence, particularly in key sectors like the UK, US, Europe, has declined. You've also seen Threads emerging as a rival to what was known as Twitter. TikTok faces some uncertainty in the US over regulations. So overall, the platforms are very quickly shifting, and it's hard to know exactly where to be or where to be in future. And that's maybe prompted one of the other trends, which is around direct messaging, safer spaces. So you see a lot more in terms of encrypted direct messaging services. Speaking here in the UK, WhatsApp is probably the most popular of those, but you have a lot of other alternatives. And then you also see a further move towards personalized and niche group platforms. So Reddit has been around almost as long as the internet, or seems to be the case. You got newer alternatives such as Discord. Both of those allow the opportunity for users to have a bit more of an anonymous personality to join specific groups. And I think part of that is a reaction to some of the worries about the public town squares, it's been called, in terms of posting to an audience and then sometimes having a backlash because people that you don't know react badly to maybe some of the things that you say or how you express yourself. So some of these platforms, I think, allow a bit more protectiveness, which can be reassuring. And in addition to this, then no webinar in 2024 would be complete without talking about AI in some sort of way. And certainly in terms of communications, it's already increasing the amount of content, the pace of change. And I think there's a lot that is also going to change really in the short term, never mind the kind of medium longer term. So it is a period of uncertainty, but I do think that this then creates opportunity if you move forward with confidence, because it means that you can have a step ahead of others who may be a bit more hesitant and not too sure how best to move forward. Just in terms of B2B comms, then also I think some additional factors for why it is increasingly critical. There's the increased digitization of business ecosystems. So I think 2020 really accelerated remote work. And though things have swung back slightly, you still see how important it can be for global collaborations and therefore how crucial digital tools and strategies, how essential they can be for maintaining connectivity and responsiveness. And then you also have the reliance on data-driven decision making. So as we spoke about a wee bit earlier, then digital channels now allow even more precise targeting and real-time engagement. And for that reason, I think nowadays customers expect more personalized interactions. So AI tools can help with that, but I think there's a lot of questions and a lot of things to think about around this sort of space. So yeah, these capabilities are essential for staying competitive and unlocking growth. And what we're going to do now is go through the fundamentals. I've broken these down into 10 sections. Really, any of these slides could probably be a webinar in itself. So do let me know if you've got any specific questions, thoughts around these, and happy to talk about these in more detail. When it comes to the fundamentals, I think we really have to begin with purpose and defining the why. So you'll see on the right-hand side of slides, we have some examples of purpose statements. And personally, I think it is crucial to produce a purpose statement, but I think also to keep it handy. So I myself am an avid user of Apple Notes, and I have pinned at the top my own personal statement for Faur, so it can keep me on track whenever I think about how to express what we are and what we're doing. So I'll look to keep that to a sentence, keep it quite concise and to the point. And I've also included some questions there that help shape your own statement. So if you want to think about where you want to be, what constitutes success, how this might align and differ from your overall organizational vision, that should be complementary. But for communications, there may be some different factors in terms of talking more about how you want to reach people and persuade them in whatever to take whatever actions you want them to take. Can also look at what you have been doing, what's worked so far and what hasn't. That can always be very informative for plotting the path forward. And there's never anything wrong with taking some inspiration from what peers are doing in similar spaces and think about how you can be inspired by that. And on that note, then, I think we then are led into the idea of the audience. So in a sense, this can seem quite simple, but often I think when we dig into it, you'll find that it's not just one target audience, that you might have several. So it's also good to clarify who these are, to identify their digital habits and understand their behavior. Because I think if you do that, you can then think about where they'll be and where you then want to be yourself. On the right-hand side, I have the traditional marketing funnel, because I think it's also good as well as thinking about the types of audience, also thinking about where they may be on that journey and think about a user journey and how you might want to take them from awareness down to purchase and loyalty or whatever goals that you want to achieve. Now, for example, when I talk about choosing platforms, those can be ones in which they already exist, but you might want to also take them in certain directions. And here I'm thinking specifically around newsletters and certain means by which you can then take them down the exceptional consideration towards kind of purchase and loyalty. Um, I should also say, in terms of the audience as well, then you may want to be where they are, but also ensure that these platforms align with their own business goals so they feel consistent with who you are. And also in terms of digital communications, I think it's really important to regularly do a type of digital audit. You can keep this quite simple in a sense, but it really is about figuring out where you're starting from. So you can summarize the use of digital communications across platforms, including website, social media, email, and so on. You can provide a comparison to peers in a wider landscape. And then through this, you can identify your current areas of strength and where your weaknesses may be. And through doing so, this will show up opportunities as well as potential future threats. As I mentioned there, a well-produced digital communications audit will enable informed decision-making and strategic planning, on which note can move forward from the audit to producing a communication strategy. And one of the things I wanted to stress here is the fact that a communication strategy should be a concise and practical go-to guide. So I always advise anybody I'm working with not to get overwhelmed with it. You can have something that's kind of up and running and then refine. And I always like the idea of it being, a live document, so that's something that you can continually refer to. In terms of a strategy layout, then it should look to have the clear objectives, ones that are aligned with your business goals. Look to define clear objectives, outline the best strategic approach to achieve these within available resources, provide details around actions to be taken. As I mentioned there, I think it's always really good, especially given what we are talking about the landscape, to have a built-in flexibility to what you do. So not necessarily be too precise because you may want to alter some of the tactics that you take, but it's good to reflect about those and have an idea of where you want to go. That can include the use of content. So there we're talking about mix and format, which I'll talk about more in a second, as well as the analytics. So having some key performance indicators to show the return on interest, and also just ensure that you're continually optimizing and improving upon what you've been doing. And in terms of the kind of fundamentals, then I think really the next step around building your website is key, which is why I'm so delighted to have James here to talk more about this. But as I mentioned in the slide, then websites are crucial for a few different reasons. First, it is fully owned, as opposed to being social platforms and even email. So it can be the most fully realized version of who you are online, which is really important for when you're looking to reach investors, businesses, other stakeholders. It also sets a tone for your presence on other platforms and channels, so it can tie these together. So I always love the idea of the website as a hub. And for that reason, I think it's also really good because it can provide whatever next steps you want your audience to take, whether that's purchase, whether that's downloading a document around your annual report, whether that's signing up for an event. But yeah, it allows that flexibility that other platforms don't have. And it can be refined because you can get very detailed analytics as well, which can help in terms of increasing conversion. So James, yeah, I don't know, in terms of what I've just said there, what your thoughts are and anything else that you think is important around websites.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting recent survey done by the Brunswick Group. Digital trends, particularly within the investment community. And the company's website was the single most important source of information. It is also the most trusted source of information. So when bankers, investors, talent, those that actually affect one's license to operate, do their research, the first place they go is the website. And that's why it's vital that that website accurately describes your company, describes the vision and the purpose, as Michael outlined, but also has content for each of those groups so they can get easily the information that they need. And we'll go on to show you a few examples of where we've done that.
Yeah. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
Uh, Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
So we work with global infrastructure partners. They are one of the world's leading investors in infrastructure, but infrastructure with the purpose of energy transition. We go on to the next one, Michael.
Yeah, of course.
Of old, they had a very classic investor private equity type site, factual, flat, dry, without the personality of the organization, what it aims to do, and the people that work in it. And what's interesting about this firm is as they came to invest in more public facing assets, they recently bought Gatwick Airport, for instance. They realized they needed a profile that worked beyond the very narrow audience that they'd operated in the past, a profile that allowed people to understand where they were going, what they plan to do, and how they manage businesses, which is critical, particularly when one is buying or dealing in a topic where the public has a considerable point of view. And it's absolutely critical that people understand the people behind the organization and what motivates them. So if we go on to the next slide. So we created a really rich experience that allows audiences to get to the content that they need, demonstrates the individuals behind global infrastructure partners, and really explains what they do, why they do it, and what they believe. This is best brought to life in the next slide, which the animation runs, you get a clear understanding of, okay, we invest in energy, digital, and transformation. We specialize in energy transformation. This is our capabilities. These are our commitments. This is the latest and most important news about us. And this site allows the team individuals to understand who runs this organization and why they run it. If you go on again, Mike. More closer to home and I think not too far away from Michael, where you used to live, Haventus.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting organization. They are enabling offshore power development, but what they do is quite complex. It's large in terms of civil engineering and needs explaining in a very simple way. It needs explaining also how that adds benefit, how that adds value, and then builds the case for further investment in this sort of engineering investment around the world. Once again, you see a really facilitating energy transition, clear purpose, really easy to understand what they do. There's a lovely little interactive graphic that explains each of the bits that they're building and what they're going to do. So not only the business community, but the local community can better understand the purpose of what this organization is looking to achieve and why its business case is so strong for further investment. Thanks, Michael. Back to
Yeah,
you.
thank you so much, James. Yeah, and I think James was mentioning I'm actually from the Murray Firth, where Haventus is based. So I think in terms of the visuals, especially, it's really great to see that showcase. Kind of makes me quite nostalgic in a sense. But no, it's great to hear about those examples. So thank you so much. And James will be here for questions as well at the end. So please do uh, pass any on that you have. And yeah, moving on from the website side, then that leads quite naturally to platform. So website as the hub, and then thinking about what the other must-haves may be. I did think it was important actually to put internet at the top because I think this is often overlooked when it comes to digital communications. And when we're speaking about LinkedIn, then actually there's quite a lot of evidence that sometimes the best representatives for an organization is the employees and how they speak about a company and how they promote activities. So being able to energize, engage employees has benefits not just for the employees themselves, for retention and so on, but it can actually be really good for creating a strong, positive brand, and allowing employees to do what they do as well as they possibly can. So we have tools such as Slack, Microsoft Teams. There's a lot of options out there for how to make the best use and strategic use of internal communications. That also incorporates email, which is one of the oldest forms of communication electronically and continues to be the most reliable way of staying in regular touch with your audience. And the benefit of having a newsletter, um, I think with all platforms, it's also about how you can provide value to your audience. So if you've got a strong case for that, then a newsletter, providing updates, providing information, providing tips, tools, whatever that may be, is something that I still think is a tremendously powerful option to have, and one that should really be probably one of those first options that you take. LinkedIn just continues to be a Goliath. I remember like the early days where it didn't feel necessarily as useful, but it really has added a huge number of functions. It's got, I think, close to, if not over 1 billion users now worldwide. In the UK alone, it's got, I think, around 40 million. So there's a huge audience on there, and particularly when it comes to the corporate and B2B side, that can be the best place to reach and engage your audience. And for that reason, actually, some of the advertising options are more expensive than you might get on Facebook and Instagram and elsewhere, but it really can be worth it. And then also just in terms of must-haves, and this is a more general one, but industry-specific platforms. So just depending on the type of industry and what you do, there may be a different external kind of services and channels where it's advisable to be. So I've not listed those there for obvious reasons, but it's worth looking at that and looking at where your peers are and looking to ensure that you're doing the right things. And in terms of that as well, in terms of being on platforms, then it's really important to think about how to speak and having a tone of voice. And I think this is of particular reference to the B2B and corporate sector, because it's very easy to be dry, to be a bit risk averse in terms of how you talk about yourself. And it's very understandable. But for that reason, again, you can stand out really positively if you do have a good tone of voice. So a tone of voice can help you establish credibility. It can build trust. It can differentiate your brand and make you stand out. And I think, in terms of working on that, with any of these elements, you could do it more in depth, but I think it can be really helpful as a starter to identify 4 to 5 values which you want to stick to. You can find examples of tone of voice values quite easily online. I've listed some there on the right-hand side. So it may be that you want to be innovative, confident, resourceful. Maybe you want to be approachable, generous, determined. But think about what your organization is, what the audience would expect of you, and look to try and reflect that in terms of the tone of voice. And as with these other elements, I think it's really good to have handy to share with your team. And through doing so, then you can ensure consistency. You can become more engaging and then have messaging which feels more persuasive because it will feel more authentic to who you are. And as I again highlight at the bottom, through doing so, then you can always look to ensure that you provide value with every interaction that you have. Also, in terms of how to speak, then there is the content mix. And there's a few different elements to this, all of which are quite important. So in terms of content, that can be defined by pillars. So you can have defined, I've called them buckets there for who you are and what you do. For each organization, that'll be different, but it's good to have an idea of the types of pillars that you have. So that might be about your employees, about customers. It may be to do with your CSR and ESG. But through doing that, you can then have a proportional mix of what you think is important for your organization, for your audience. Through doing so, then you can then define the types of content. So I've listed some there, and they are numerous in terms of corporate sector. Then sometimes it can be more around white papers, webinars, reporting. There's also all sorts such as podcasts behind the scenes. As I mentioned at the bottom, it's quite easy to get overwhelmed and overstretched. So I do think with with the pillars as well, then it's good to think about having a two or three that are the most crucial for you and for reaching your audience. And also at the same time, then there's the format. So that can find nowadays, video continues to play a more central role. But you do have images, graphics, infographics, audio, text. So think about how to best balance those given the size of your team. Video can be great, but it can be a bit more resource hungry in terms of whether that's doing it yourself in terms of time or whether that's hiring organizations. Text can be easier, but then sometimes that can be a bit harder to grab attention when platforms like LinkedIn are a bit more video first. So again, it's good to think about where you are, the resources you have, and how to make the best use of those. And on that note, then that also leads into the importance of planning and scheduling. So looking to have some good planning tools can increase your effectiveness and efficiency. Um, it can provide visibility of what's upcoming, can help you plan appropriately for big events where you want to make a splash. And then also through that, it can be really good because it can allow that time to be a bit more responsive and capitalize on topical news and opportunities that may present themselves. So it helps you to make the best use of your budget. And yeah, there's a variety of options based upon that. There can be, at the lowest end, a kind of very humble spreadsheet, which is still very powerful and does a lot of organizations well. But there are a lot of great tailored solutions, such as CoSchedule, Contently, Monday, Trello. There's a lot of tools that you have at your disposal, so it's worth considering those and making the best choice based upon your organization. And also in terms of planning and preparation, I think it's good to talk about crisis preparedness and being ready for what's around the corner. So it's always something that you hope not to need, but crisis communications can be literally company saving. So for that reason, it's best not just to cross your fingers, but to put some plans in place. And the reason for that is, especially when a crisis does present itself, if you're not prepared, you're more liable to react rather than respond, making use of the more emotional side of things. And you really want to be quite rational in your approach and know what you're doing. So, in terms of crisis preparedness, it's good to consider what's around the corner, points of weakness, and then just put some simple plans in place for those. How, when, where, if you respond, actions to take, and also really crucially, which key stakeholders to involve and when you want to involve them. So it is a fundamental thing to think about when it comes to communications, because again, hopefully it's something that doesn't spring up, but it can be crucial if it does. And then in terms of building relationships, then the role of customer relationship management, also known as CRM, there's a huge number of tools nowadays for this, and they can be absolutely fantastic in terms of being able to understand your audience, track relationships, be able to segment that by some of the maybe highest profile audience members that you want to reach and convert. But just having a very considered, holistic view of things. Through these, you can make the most of data-driven insights and then have quite tailored strategies through these for how to reach your audience. And that really helps in terms of the relationship building. So what I think is also important in terms of communications is being able to reach your audience across different digital touch points, as I call them. So whether that's the website, newsletter, social media, other means, it's really great to keep the audience updated, informed, and have you front most in their mind so that when they're at the point of consideration, then they will think of you. And that also helps in terms of more direct approaches so that they know who you are and understand what you're looking to achieve. And finally, then there is measure and optimize, which I think is just, the idea of having a virtuous 360 feedback loop. is just like a key one for being able to assess what you've been doing, analyze it, and strengthen. So with the strategy, as I spoke about, it's really important to have in place some key performance indicators. Those don't need to just be kind of numbers, engagement rates, conversion rate, leads quality, that's all good. But also it can be quantitative as well. Um, oh, sorry, qualitative as well as quantitative. So it can be around using surveys and other approaches to find out how your audience feel about you, what you've been doing well, what you can do better. And just, yeah, looking to do that, whether it's on a quarterly basis, annual, um, trying to have monthly reports, I think is really good. And for that, you have a lot of tools and options at your disposal. So of course, there's Google Analytics for websites and for some other tracking options. You've got CRM software, a lot of social listening, and again, a lot of tools to kind of get you on the right path for ensuring that you continue to strengthen what you do. Um, yeah, so thank you so much for going through fundamentals. In a one slide summary, then we have the 10 things to do. So if you're getting started today, or if you just want to build from what you're doing today. So yes, I won't go through these in detail, but find your purpose through a concise purpose statement, define your audience, performing a digital audit to take note of where you are, having your first strategy with the objectives, actions, expected results, making your website your digital home, uh, then being on the right other platforms and deciding what those are, starting with a kind of tone of voice and content mix. So having some basic values, listing the types of content that you want to begin producing, publishing, and what sort of pillars you want to have. The planning and preparedness for content events, potential crisis situations, a focus on network building and having that CRM tool or customer database, and then with the measuring and optimizing just so that you can continue to strengthen at regular intervals. So yeah, thank you all so much for being with us. Now we're going to get to some questions. We've got a few here. The first of these is for yourself, James. So this is around investment for non-listed companies. And the question is it worth the effort to invest heavily in digital communications if our company is not publicly listed? And what specific benefits can we expect?
It's definitely worth the effort. Excuse me. The audience requirements and regulatory requirements are slightly different. But one of the things that we've done a lot of work with is helping organizations that are either looking to have a large investment in the not too distant future, quite often from private equity or an investment firm, or even at a bigger scale, we've looked at organizations who are mapping out a listing on one of the markets in the world, US, UK, or Europe in 2 or 3 years' time. And it is vital that one builds a narrative that starts early. It's vital that one builds a narrative around the leadership, the business case, and starts to put in place those building blocks that when the analysts come to look at the organization, they can see that there is a history within that organization of proper sort of management, clear business state, and that the organization ticks all the right boxes and has an obvious value story. And they look back 3 to 5 years when they do their research.
Thank you very much, James. And I think this kind of leads on from it slightly in terms of the next question, but it's around the initial focus and digital strategy. And the question is, if we were to prioritize one aspect of our digital communication strategy first, what should it be? Should we focus on developing our website to attract the most people initially? So yeah, James, it'd be great to get your thoughts on that. I can chip in as well after.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much more than just the website. Sometimes I describe the website as the aircraft carrier for content that essentially then gets out into the various audience groups. But assuming the organization has what we call the brilliant basics, so that the site is secure, it works on all the different platforms that it needs to work on, and it's actually easy to use. Just on that for a second, it's surprising the number of organizations who put technology at the front as one of their cases for investment. Their sites perhaps don't work properly on a mobile or trigger that Google browser warning that this site is no longer secure. So there are some real fundamentals that need to be looked at first. But then I would actually, strangely enough, for a web design company, I would look to the content first. I'd get the right stories in there. I'd look at the leadership pages. I'd look at how you describe the business case of what you do. And I'd look at the messaging, which is important for the audience groups. Then look at how we evolve the site from a website point of view. But back to you, Michael.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think in terms of the storytelling, I think it's one of the great things for a website is it allows you to do that in a very um, reflective fashion and telling the story that you want to tell at the stage that you're at. I think in terms of stories, those are always going to change as well. So where you are like a year or two down the line will be different. And actually, that kind of leads really nicely into another question around investment, and also around kind of website. So the question is, how should we structure our investment in digital communications, particularly for our website?
Once again, if the brilliant basics are all covered, they're really reputational risks, so they would need to be covered really, really quickly. Then look at the content, work out the strategy for the site, match it. Part of that should be your overall business strategy and how you plan to evolve as a company. Then we would typically, for a client, do an analysis of, okay, this is what you have at the moment that works. This is what you have that is kind of redundant, trivial, ineffective. And this is where you have gaps in terms of either functionality or content. And we would put together a plan for the client to go, okay, this is how we're going to evolve your site out over 5 years. It's easy sometimes to think that the big investment in the website is the build. And that is sometimes quite a large investment, but actually the bulk of the effort and time and resource goes into the 5 years that a website typically runs, and it's keeping it fresh, keeping it going.
Mhm. Thank you very much, James. I'm aware we're just at the limit of time, so I've got one more question here. So I'll answer that hopefully concisely. We'll see how that goes. But the final question I have for right now is it's how can we adapt our digital communication strategy to the shifting landscape of social platforms, which is something we spoke about earlier. Um, yeah, and in terms of that, I think it really is around the kind of building in flexibility. So I think it's partially why it's so important to have the kind of website as we've kind of spoken about. But I think particularly when it comes to social platforms, it's good to think about where we are now, be able to anticipate where things are going, but it will be important also to be able to review things on a quarterly basis, seeing how the platforms are performing, seeing if that is where you're finding your audience. Once you're publishing regularly on social platforms, then you can see what type of content is working most, what's resonating, and which is kind of most successful in terms of achieving those goals. So sometimes, content might be successful in terms of reach and awareness, but it might not take necessarily the audience to the next step that you want to take them on. So I think it's been quite good in terms of the measurement of things. I think just also keeping an eye on the landscape and seeing what platforms are becoming more popular for the audiences that you have. And also just in terms of like the strategy itself, then I think it's quite good to have KPIs that are quite more specific in terms of the numbers and so on, and maybe the kind of shorter and medium term. And then as they get long term, it can be more about the kind of broader goals and ambitions that you have. So yes, hopefully that's answered your question. But yes, on that note, I'd like to thank James so much for joining us today, and thank you all so much for being with us.